Think outside the box, if you will. I mean, go there, go off campus. Let's think this through. And sure enough, that's where the Mustang was born. When it finally hit, it took the country by storm.
Hi everybody and welcome to another edition of Cars in Context. I'm your host John Clor. You know, this is the Motor City and this is the show where we put cars into the context of your everyday life. Today we're going to take you back into the history books and have a little bit of fun and probably change a definition that you may have and maybe some old feelings you have about an old car that came around a long time ago and now is used in modern day vernacular. And I'm talking about the Edsel. Today we're going to find out, was the Edsel really a failure or was it just ahead of its time? To get us to the bottom of that question, we brought in none other than James Sawyer. Jim, thank you so much. Jim is at the Society of Manufacturing Engineers, longtime auto journalist. Jim was my managing editor at the News and at Auto Week, and Jim, we've been together a long time. We happen to know a little bit about this subject, and we happen to not follow the crowd when we talk about such a great car. So we're going to get into that subject in just a couple of seconds. But before we do, let's find out what's happening in the news. I'll take this one, Jim. The first one is news about something that's called car sharing. Do you know car sharing?
I don't do that.
There's a lot of car sharing going on my driveway. If I have gas in my car, I find out that it gets shared. But no, we're not talking about that. We're talking about the actual car sharing membership that you now join to actually, so you don't have to buy a car, you can actually use it when you need it, and everybody gets to share a certain vehicle. Over the last 5 years, the idea of car sharing and some of the companies that do it has gone up to 2.3 million people now involved in car sharing programs. And more growth is being expected to the program. Jim, they're taking somebody else's car, some company's car, and they'll share it and use it when they need to. But don't you like your own personal space? I don't get the whole thing.
I've heard they found some very strange things in those cars after some people have used them. So
I don't know about that. But now, apparently there's a group that says they'll have over 12 million people doing car sharing programs by 2020. Now, what it does is it gives you access to a wide range of different cars. So let's say, one day you need a pickup truck, and the next day you need a van, and the next day you want a sports car. By doing this car sharing thing, you're able to get the different kinds of vehicles depending on your needs. And it is far cheaper than actually owning a car. Now, OnStar, the GM system,
right.
They claimed that for every vehicle that's used in a car sharing program, 13 cars come off the roads. So the question is, if this car sharing thing takes off, could that be a threat to the auto industry? We need fewer cars. You don't have to buy cars, you can just share them. Could that be an issue for sales?
It might be in this country, but there's a huge hunger in the rest of the world for automobiles. So overall, globally, probably not.
Yeah. Well, why don't you take one, Jim?
All right. The more gears, the merrier. As fuel economy standards ramp up, it seems like with each new vehicle launch, another gear or two is added to modern transmissions.
That's true.
Now, I know this is true because for Manufacturing Engineering Magazine, which is the magazine of the Society of Manufacturing Engineers that I write for, I've done 2 or 3 stories already this year on this topic. And we are seeing more and more and more gears in automatic.
Well, there was the Automax came out. There was a slush box two speed,
right?
And then it was the big deal that you got a 3-speed automatic in the 70s, and then when
actually that was probably the 60s.
60s. Well, then when
70s was 4.
When 4-speed manuals were popular, then 5 speeds came out and they give you overdrive, and then the automatics went up to 4-speed automatics.
And then today the common automatic is 6.
Is it really?
Yes.
Oh.
And Jeep and Land Rover have just come out with vehicles with 9 speeds. And Ford and General Motors are collaborating on the development of a 10-speed automatic transmission and a 9-speed manual transmission.
Kind of the difference between the guy that had the really expensive racer bike with the 10-speed and you had the banana seat.
Well, this is an attempt to grab the low-hanging fruit in terms of improving fuel economy.
Jim, here's the question. A 10-speed transmission is way more expensive, way more complex. It works differently. When is the cost versus the fuel economy gain going to I mean, 10 speeds?
The head of ZF transmission,
okay.
as the Brits and the Germans say, feels that 9 speeds is the maximum required. But still, as we said, GM and Ford are looking at a 10-speed, and Hyundai is working on a 10-speed automatic of its own. So who knows?
Goodness.
It might just be a case of ego and somebody saying mine is bigger.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too, remember, folks, CVTs, constant variable transmissions, which is more like a belt up a cone. They didn't really actually shift. You didn't hear 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. None of that stuff. It was just more like a.
All these gears are an attempt to accomplish the same thing with a more proven technology than the CVT. Yeah.
Well, I'm telling you, it's getting crazy. I'm happy with just 3 or 4 speeds. I'm good.
That's your speed.
That's my speed. Speaking of speeds, apparently Scions have not been speeding out of Toyota dealerships of late. In fact, since about '06, the brand has really suffered some sales declines. And Jim, this little brand that Toyota started was started for young people. We've got a young person's brand. So instead of buying a Toyota Corolla, come on in and get a Scion. It was a car built especially for the young people. Well, apparently, older people were buying it too, and that kind of, it's like
There's that old saying, John.
What?
You can sell a young person's car to an old person, but you can't sell an old person's car to a young person.
Why is that? Well, anyway,
We all want to be young.
No. Well, while the demand for Scions have slowed, now Ward's Auto is reporting that Toyota, who originally would not let anybody cancel their Scion dealerships, are very quietly saying, it's okay. We're not going to penalize you if you want to bail from being a Scion dealer. Apparently, they have about 1,000 dealers in the U.S. right now, which is 200 less than the total number of Toyota dealers. I mean, do you really need that many Scion dealers if they're not selling at all? And the question is, so it should really, analysts think that maybe 300 to 500 dealers is plenty for the amount of cars they sell.
For the amount of cars, yeah. That's
So
true.
it really has struggled with the brand. We're going to be watching this brand. And does a car company really need a youth brand? I mean, does Ford have to make a special brand for young people? Do they have to make a special brand for old people? And we're going to be talking about a Ford brand during the main segment of the show, but why don't you take another one?
Okay.
I want to give it away.
Sometimes you can cut too much, and that's what General Motors has found. The Detroit News reports that GM is bringing back some retirees to make sure everything goes smoothly.
Senior power!
As it's launching 20 new or refreshed vehicles.
So
this year
they
in the US.
retired, and they say, hey, can you come back?
Yes, that's what they're saying.
Why?
This may sound familiar to you.
No, not to me. It's usually bye. You're too old.
This didn't happen to you at the news?
Oh
Were you?
yeah. Oh yeah. It sure did.
I actually happened to do that to John once upon a time.
Jim laid me off.
Had to let him go.
It was just a
Found out I cut too many. Called him
called me
back.
back.
That's what GM is doing here. You've got experience. You've got institutional knowledge that maybe the people fresh out of school don't have yet. So it makes sense to call them back.
And nowadays, the launch of a new vehicle is so important for an automaker. If you dare come out of the box and stumble, the whole brand can suffer. So maybe the retirees, what are they? They're going down and playing shuffleboard or hanging out at the coming to the War Memorial, taking a class. I mean, they're having fun.
Right.
But get them back in the workforce. A lot of us. I'm going to be back. I don't know about you folks, but I'm not going to retire. I'm actually going to be the guy handing out the flyer in the front of Meyer.
Well, Jen, like you are fond of saying, knowledge is power.
Yeah.
These people have the knowledge,
right?
And General Motors wants to put that power to work.
Bless you, General Motors. That's really cool. Listen, I've got a completely different story about talking about the older people, the retirees. How about really young people? What do young girls really go for when it comes to?
You're asking the wrong person.
Well, that's why a British survey that just came out said that girls go for men that have the green cars instead of those with the big high-performance gas guzzlers. Now, Jim, that's totally opposite what happened in our era, where if you had the hot car, the girls would be like you, and if you had the little gas guzzler economy car that was your grandmother's, they didn't want to go driving around with it. Didn't they see American Graffiti?
Maybe not, and I don't know if there was a British graffiti.
Probably not.
Freud, the great father of psychoanalysis, once said, "What do women really want?" We still don't know. Things change.
Knowledge is power on cars and context, but we'll never be able to answer that question. Ladies, if you can, why don't you send it in to Pride of My Ride? Or I guess it's a question of viewer mail.
Right.
I have no idea.
Yeah, that's
I
right.
really don't.
Ladies, send in the cars that you're proud of.
37 years of marriage to the lovely John Clor, and it's hard to figure her out. She's amazing.
And she says the same thing.
She says the same thing. But this study, going back to the news, this study says that more than half of the women they surveyed in the UK said the drivers of expensive sports cars seem to be arrogant. And then this company called Motors Co. UK. But many women and men too found the drivers of eco-friendly cars, such as a Leaf or a Prius, to be conscientious, intelligent, and safe.
Well, remember, John, that Britain was once a great empire,
Yep.
and now it's not.
Well, they've also been living the green life a lot longer. Gasoline's been, $80 billion a
yeah,
gallon
right.
out there. So it used to be that, only 48% now are saying that men, actually about half of the men are convinced that if you have a really hot, expensive car, that will attract the women. But only 53% of women said the drivers of expensive sports cars are arrogant and self-centered, and they think they're actually a danger on the road. Ladies, send us in your mail. Tell us, what do you like? What kind of car do you want your favorite guy to be driving? And we'll put that letter on the air. Anyway, we'll have to come back, talk about great cars, great brands, and brands with an image. Right after this break, we're going to come back and talk about, was the Edsel really a failure, or was it just ahead of its time, here with Jim Sawyer? And we'll be right back. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Cars in Context. I'm your host, John Clor. Today we've got with us Jim Sawyer of the Society of Manufacturing Engineers. Jimmy, thank you for coming by.
Thanks for having
Jimmy,
me back.
this is so much fun because you're my brand expert, and we're going to talk about a brand that I think everybody's heard about. I don't care if you're 12, you've heard about the Edsel. When you look it up in a dictionary now, it's synonymous with the word failure. Folks, if you know anything about the Edsel or have heard about the Edsel, today I'm about to change your mind. I think with Jim's knowledge and a little bit of going back and seeing what really happened, put this whole story into context for everybody, you might think that maybe the Edsel wasn't really a failure. Maybe it was ahead of its time. Jim, let's take us back into that era of the 50s, the Finn cars in Detroit, Detroit's Big Iron. We had some wonderfully gorgeous, absolutely knockout, big American chrome monsters that really were dominating the highways. And right around this time, Ford decided it needed to do something different. What was it?
Well, there were three big things going on in the automotive world in 1958. The first was that quad headlights, 4 headlights, 2 per side, were being accepted,
Right.
Being put on cars. The second was that Ford launched the Edsel, which was supposed to be a competitor for GM's, as they called them at the time, the mid-size, the mid-class brands.
Well, Ford had Mercury. It was Ford,
Right.
Mercury, then Lincoln. So they had
Right.
3 steps. But
So
General Motors had
Ford faced off with Chevrolet,
Okay.
Mercury, Pontiac, and the lower end
Okay.
Oldsmobiles, and then there was Cadillac and Lincoln. But Ford had this gap that overlapped the top end Oldsmobiles and the Buicks. They thought they'd come out with the Edsel, but they ran into this third thing that was happening in 1958.
What was that third thing?
And that was the worst recession since World War II.
Wow. So it's difficult enough to really think of a whole new car brand, think of an entire new personality for this car, new design, something so totally different, you'd catch everybody's attention. And then to do this in the middle of a recession, now they had no control over that, obviously, but to launch this, not only to spend that kind of money during a downturn in the economy, then you've got people who aren't buying cars in the first place, cars that you know about. Now you're asking them to trust and put money down on something they've never heard of, don't know about, and not sure they really like. So when the Edsel came out, what was the calling card of the Edsel? I mean, we have a picture of one here. The front grille, I think, was, the number one thing you saw.
Difference was supposed to be the calling card of the Edsel, and a good difference. A difference in looks, a difference in technology, a difference in style, and even a difference in price for a car of this class. It was supposed to be less expensive than its competitors.
So you've got like the near luxury segment. It's cool. It's the Edsel look is different. So you're setting yourself apart with this luxury feel, but you don't have to pay the premium price.
Right.
Well, that's
not as much of a premium price.
Okay.
Certainly more than a
So
Ford
that
or
sounds
Chevy.
like a really good idea. That's great. Now, so what the car comes out? I remember them saying they had movie stars, which is still going on today, pitch the Edsel, and there were TV shows where the Edsel was the big sponsor. It was all over the television, a lot of print ads. Edsel was everywhere. They hammered the media to have people go, look, this is the Edsel. This is the beginning of something new.
They even had Dan Draper, as we can see here. Oh.
But the car, Jim, right off the top, when you look at every other car in 1950, you look at this car right now that we have on the screen, I mean, most importantly, all of a sudden, the quad headlamps other people had, but all of a sudden you notice the center of the car had this giant protruding horse collar grille. This was an attempt to do what? Just
set the car apart. Look different than any other car on the road, get it noticed, hopefully in a good way so that it would draw sales. Because face it, even today, cars are still a personal statement. People want to stand out. They want their cars to say, I'm different, I'm special.
right.
And the
Well, it
Edsel
did.
tried
And folks,
that too.
here's the problem. Okay, now we've had cars today that come out that look awfully different. Some cars like the Nissan Cube or the Kia Soul or the Pontiac Aztec, or one of my all-time difficulty getting over is the Juke, the Nissan Juke. I don't know who styled that, and I hope that maybe it was too much Adderall. I don't know what the problem. There's obviously some kind of
Or LSD.
it could be a hallucinatory drug.
Right.
These cars are not what you'd call classically beautiful. And apparently when the Edsel came out, people were appalled. They thought the car, one of the writers said, the car looks like it was sucking on a lemon. So apparently this new bold design, now large noses on cars were nothing new. I mean, back in the original center-mounted radiator was a fixture of
Right.
the cars from the Model T or on up. So we got away from that when we got our more aerodynamic bodies, and by Edsel pronouncing this giant mouth, nose, grill, horse collar,
Vertical smile.
yeah, this was really a turnoff for people.
It turned out to be, but you have to remember that this was an era of styling exuberance
Okay.
in America. You had two-tone cars, tri-tone cars with 3 different colors. You had huge fins on
yeah.
them. You could almost call them origami cars because so many cars had multiple creases in their sheet metal to give them a dynamism and a look to stand out from the crowd. Because
Everything was looking like a rocket ship.
and the previous generation had been very rounded.
Right, right. So Edsel comes out. It has this completely huge styling departure, let's face
Yes.
it. And then, folks, it comes out, and what happens, it's not accepted. It comes out in a bad economy. The styling is like what we'd call polarizing today. Either you love it or you hate it. But, Jim, it went far deeper than that. What were some of other Edsel teething problems that we know about?
Well, one was quality.
Okay.
Edsel was supposed to be a division of its own within Ford Motor Company. And at that time, if you were a division, you had your own factories to make your car models.
Right.
Ford had its plants, Mercury had its plants, Oldsmobile had its plants up in Lansing, Buick was up in Flint. Edsel, no. Some of their cars were built in Ford factories, some were built in Mercury
And that's
factories.
because the Edsel had 2 different platforms, a smaller Edsel and a larger Edsel. The smaller one, the smaller wheelbase, was built off the large Ford, and the larger Edsel was built off the Mercury platform, which was larger than Ford. So
Right.
that means some of the Edsels had to be built in Ford plants, and some of the Edsels had to be built in Mercury plants. Now that makes sense, but they just didn't have the, people talk about flexible manufacturing. They were doing that a lot then, but what really happened? And so they didn't have enough time, or?
Well, if you remember, at the time, the whole idea of manufacturing was to make as many products as similar as possible in as short a period of time for as low a cost.
Okay.
This threw a big monkey wrench into that equation.
So there are stories out there where people bought a brand new Edsel, they drove it home, and they looked on the side of it, and down the side of the door was their Edsel trim, and all of a sudden the Ford trim was put on accidentally. Or they had 3 Edsel hubcaps and a Mercury hubcap. Or they half the dashboard was Ford and half was Edsel. Or the seats, they got mixed up.
Right.
Because there was so much stuff hitting the assembly line. You know, Fords and Mercurys at the time were, you could get a lot of options and colors, a lot of interiors, a lot more than they have today, and things got mumbo jumbo. So a lot of the misbuilds got out there. And what's the problem? I mean, kind of today, they're collector's items, the stamp with the upside down airplane, that's a misprint. But
Right.
cars, when you pay a premium, you don't want a misbuild.
When you pay a premium, you don't want that.
And yeah, so
And,
it's
and there was another problem.
Okay.
I don't recall offhand if any Edsels were available with a manual transmission.
Yeah, could get a
They-
3-speed. The base
okay.
car, 3-speed on a tree.
But they were meant to have automatics.
Okay.
And they tried to do something that some other car companies had done, have a push-button automatic,
Yeah.
where you push a button instead of
The
using a gear,
teletouch, yeah.
using a gear lever to put the car in gear. But the technology behind those buttons was different. It wasn't the
Jim, now
same as
look
other
at that
people were using.
beautiful dashboard on the Edsel there. The speedometer was almost like a floating compass.
gimbal, yeah.
A gimbal. And in the center, where normally you'd expect today's horns, they had these little buttons: park, drive, neutral, reverse. And all you had to do, you didn't have to take your hands off the wheel, folks. All you had to do is put your finger and push down on what gear you wanted to select. And magically, this Edsel Teletouch, how beautiful that is, would engage the gear. Now, Jim, this was pioneering technology. Other car companies had levers and mechanical
And cables
cable
and- right.
units on the dashboard. But this was all housed inside that tiny little, so Jim, that had to be electronic.
Yes.
Wires had to be.
And it had to do something else, John. It had to stay stationary while the
turning.
wheel around it was turning.
Okay, so now you've
So
got,
you've got maybe some complications there as well.
so wires turning, and folks, of course, if you've done any research on Edsel, you know about the Teletouch. The Teletouch didn't work so well. Pioneering technology usually takes a prove out, and when it hit the market,
Right.
people were punching their Teletouches. Now these operated on before electronics that we know.
Right.
Solid
No
state.
solid state, no computers.
No transistors. Back then, when a current went through the Teletouch, it had an electronic point, contact points, and the points would touch, and that would send the signal to the transmission. Well, guess what? Points get out of alignment, they get dirty, they don't
Wear
work,
out,
they wear
yeah.
out, and when you hit drive and your car doesn't go anywhere, you're not real happy all of a sudden. You say, I just bought this new Edsel, and I'm taking my friends to dinner, and I go to hit drive, and nothing happens. So you've got to call a tow truck with your brand new Edsel and be embarrassed and go get your beat up 5-year-old car to take them out because the Edsel didn't work. So that car became a nightmare. First of all, there's no really easy fix other than, you want to tear it out. I want to get a different car. Give me a 3-speed manual on the tree. I don't trust. Now when you lose trust, you lose the customer.
Yes, but Edsel did one big service to American culture. Because before that, when you had something that didn't work, you'd have to, you'd get really upset about it, and you'd say, this thing is a real,
Yeah.
and you wouldn't know what to say. Now we know that we say Edsel.
It's an Edsel.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, well, you gave us that function. All right, so let's go back. Now let's talk about that. People think it's a failure because it was so ugly. But we know for a fact there's a lot of ugly cars driving around out there today, even when we have real designers. What happened was our cars got designed with a sense of cookie cutters. And when the imports came into our market, everything was a bar of soap. If you went out in the parking lot at the mall and you happened to have a beige Camry, good luck. Because there are 80,000 beige and silver Camrys, and oh, by the way, they all looked alike. So Jim, the Edsel may have been just ahead of its time because that big nose, quad headlamp, horse collar, about what, a decade later, it was also all of a sudden popular.
Sometimes a look takes time to become appreciated. And I think that's what happened
So
with
the
Edsel.
Pontiac, starting in the mid-60s, Pontiacs came out. Now, in 1960, Edsel did try to change itself, and they tried to be a Ford. It didn't work. It went away in 1960. But Pontiac, in the mid-60s, started coming out with cars with very similar styling cues as the Edsel, the big elongated taillights.
Well, it didn't take that long with the rear end look of the car.
No, I mean, that's
Pontiac adopted that in the early 60s.
So now look, Jim, we have quad headlamps, this big nostrilless big nose on the car, a
Right.
horse collar, if you will. It's got a snout, 4 headlamps. Why did Pontiac sell like gangbusters?
They got there later. People were already used to the look from the Edsel.
They saw the Edsel.
Right.
So maybe, folks, when
And
we...
Pontiac was hot in the 60s. The brand
We build
carried
excitement.
the look. Edsel didn't have a brand established yet. It came out with that look at the same time it was
and
born.
then saddled with the quality. So, folks, now that you see this, does that change your mind just a little bit? Maybe it wasn't all about looks. You know, at 2 in the morning, all the gals in the bar look great, and then you get them home. And
My wife won't let me stay up that late. So
no, they grow on you, and that's what happened. I think with the look of the Edsel. I think the design, Pontiac has proven. Although Pontiac's no longer with us, really wasn't their fault. I think they were a viable brand. I think design does have a lot to do with it. But
Right.
let's look at Edsel now, folks, in a new light. Jim Sawyer, thank you for that insight on the Edsel. I think you're absolutely correct. I hope people will change their minds. But you know what? It's time for a really special part of the show.
what part is that, John?
Well, it's one of my favorites. It's called Pride in My Ride. And today, Jim, I think you know all about this special segment where you, the viewer, sends us a picture of your car and you tell us why you have pride in your ride. And guess who sent Jay Clor at Cars and Contact a picture today? None other than Jim Sawyer from the Society of Manufacturing Engineers. Jim, what do we have here?
Well, what we have here, and by the way, I didn't send it to you. I brought it in myself.
well, thank you.
This is my 1967 Lincoln Continental convertible.
I love it.
This is a very special car. These pictures were taken when my son was a senior in high school.
Wow.
He took it to the prom.
Yeah, baby.
This car, I graduated from high school myself in 1967.
Uh-oh.
So there's chronological connection here. I think it's a very beautiful, dynamic looking styling job on this car. Plus, there is this. I looked at the build plate, and this car was built on November 30th, 1966 at the Ford Wixom plant. My dad was the assistant plant engineer there, and that also happened to be my parents' 20th wedding anniversary.
Had to be
So
your car. Had to be
it had
nobody
be
else's
my
car. But you know, thank you. If you have a car or Pride in My Ride, make sure you do send it to me, Jay Clor at Cars and Contact. But Jim, there's even more. I think we should ask Lauren Parrott, is there viewer mail? We have a couple minutes left. Lauren, do we have some?
It's viewer mail.
Yes,
Oh,
you did
my.
it. Thank you, Lauren.
You're welcome.
Jim, we only have a couple minutes, but I do want to answer the folks who do take time to send us a piece of mail. Why don't you take that first one?
Okay, this comes to us from Bill E. of Grosse Pointe Park, and he watches Cars and Context on AT&T Uverse, channel 99. Dear Cars and Context, I had heard about 2 years ago that Ford and Toyota would be working together on developing a new hybrid system. But now I hear the companies have decided to do it on their own. Why do these partnerships keep getting formed and then dissolved? Wouldn't it be better if all automakers worked
Can't
together?
we just all get along?
But you know what? If all automakers worked together,
Yeah.
then we wouldn't have automakers. We'd have automaker.
That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, you can team up, but you're in the business to put the other guy out of
And
business.
you're in the business to make money for your shareholders, not somebody in
that's what
Toyota
Bill,
City.
So that's what you're not thinking about.
Plus, there are other things here. There are different ways about going about things, engineering things.
Yeah.
Perhaps the guys at Ford think one way, the guys at Toyota think the other.
Not
Their
uncommon.
current hybrid systems are very common, and they have some cross-licensing agreements between Ford and Toyota
next up we
that
go.
allow them to use technology. But
That's very good. Thank Bill for sending that one in. I've got one from Mary A. of Grosse Pointe Woods, who watches us on Comcast Cable Channel 915 in HD. Whew. Dear John, I got a Dear John letter from Mary. What is with the on-again, off-again freeway lights on I-94? Have you noticed those, folks, from, say, the Grosse Pointe border, from 8 Mile all the way into Connor or so? Horrific story of what's going on there. You know what I'm going to do? For you, Mary, I'm going to do a special show coming up on what's going on our freeway system. We'll have that shortly for you. So rather than answer your question today, stay tuned to Cars and Context. But if you do have a question for Cars and Context, send it to me, Jay Clor, carsandcontext.com, and we'll be sure to put it on the air. Jim, thank you again. Jim Sawyer from the Society of Manufacturing Engineers, answering our questions as usual, and I appreciate you coming in, and I appreciate you watching. So remember, until next time, that knowledge is power. I'm your host, John Clor, and until next time, thanks for watching.